So the children's television show, I'm sure you'll be familiar with, Sesame Street, sometimes displays a group of objects while asking kids to determine which one is the most different, right? One of these things is not like the other. One of these things doesn't belong. The accompanying song goes, "Can you tell which thing is not like the other by the time I finish this song?" So I actually sent its producers the title of today's sermon in case they wanted to use it for that segment, right? The Singularity, the Humanistic Ethic, and the Enlightenment Project. Now, I haven't heard back. But since Big Bird and Elmo and the Cookie Monster apparently don't wish to answer the question, I'll ask you which of these things is not like the other. But first, here are some brief definitions for your consideration. Okay? The Enlightenment Project refers to the 18th century liberal, intellectual, and philosophical movement that emphasizes reason, individualism, and human progress as the primary means to improve society and to understand our world. It champions ideals like freedom, reason, tolerance, and human dignity. And today the term is also used in reference to our ongoing efforts to apply these Enlightenment principles to our modern life, society, and to human advancement. The humanistic ethic refers to the moral idea that everything we do, all of our laws, institutions, and endeavors ought to be for the benefit of human welfare and individual unfolding, which includes care for the environment and empathy for other creatures. Right? We can't be fully human without empathy. We can't be healthy humans without a healthy environment. It has been loosely articulated as the ancient universal golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, an ethic based upon human biology, human need, human feelings, experiences, and more directly, in Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative that no person should be used as a means to someone else's ends, but should be considered an end within themselves, and even later as democracy's core commitment to what it calls the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The Singularity refers to a time in the near future when human intelligence will merge with machine intelligence. It's a term borrowed from mathematics and physics, but only as a metaphor. In mathematics, it describes an undefined point. In physics, it's a point where the laws of physics break down and we have no idea what's happening beyond it. Although we can roughly predict when the singularity will occur and some of the changes that will occur up to that point, we can't imagine what life will be like afterward. Like a black hole, we have no insight regarding what lies beyond or within that point. The point of this technological singularity. So which one of these things is not like the other? You did go to sleep, didn't you? Todd? Milne, where are you?
They're all alike.
They're all alike? Yeah, well, I hope so. There's no right or wrong answer. I mean, there is a right answer, but it's okay if you get it wrong. No? Okay. It's a good question. Oh, which one of these things is not like the other? The singularity. Thank you, you brave soul. You got the answer. At least so it would seem, right? So it would seem. There's an obvious connections between the Enlightenment Project and the humanistic approach to society. Not so much with the singularity. But I don't actually believe that this is true, and will argue today that the singularity is a consequence of the Enlightenment Project and has been largely driven by its commitment to the humanistic ethic. So this is so whether the singularity's engineers and proponents realize it or not, and whether most Enlightenment liberals have ever even heard the term singularity or not. at least in this sense. The Enlightenment project and the humanistic ethic are so intricately entwined that it is difficult to say which came first. Historically, the humanistic ethic was expressed in some form long before the Enlightenment, but it is hard to conceive that this exquisite principle could have emerged from anything other than enlightened minds. Yet the fast encroaching technological singularity, as I shall endeavor to prove, is also a consequence of the Enlightenment. And if whatever lies beyond it is going to be good for humanity, then we must keep our exponentially improving technology, especially artificial intelligence, coupled with this humanistic ethic. That's crucial. The belief that the sole criterion of ethical value, as psychologist Erich Fromm phrases it, must be human welfare, and that the unfolding and growth of every person should be the aim of all our social and political activities, and I will add, including all of our entrepreneurial activities. Additionally, the scientific technological revolution that we're enjoying today began in the 19th century as a direct result of the 17th and 18th centuries' Enlightenment and its liberal principles. But before we get there, it's important to remember that the Enlightenment was an outgrowth of the Renaissance of the 14th through 16th centuries, which was itself inspired by the early Greek philosophers more than 2,500 years ago, almost 2,600 years ago, the first thinkers in history that we know of who worked to explain the world in natural rather than supernatural terms. The first among them, Thales of Miletus, considered the first Greek philosopher, for example, was famous for saying, "It's not magic. There's a reason for all of it." Using reason and observation, Thales developed a natural theory explaining earthquakes, was able to accurately forecast the weather, and predict solar eclipses. His student, his amazing student, Anaximander, was the first person we know of who realized the earth is a body of finite dimensions floating in space. The first to realize the earth floats in space, which must have sounded crazy at the time with no concept of gravity. How can anything possibly float in space without falling? Anaximander was also the first to claim that rainwater is water from the sea and rivers that evaporate because of the sun's heat, and that thunder and lightning are caused by the colliding and splitting of clouds, and that earthquakes are caused by fissures in the earth. He also said, get this, that animals originally came from the sea or from the primal humidity that once covered the earth. The first animals were thus either fish or fish-like creatures. They moved onto land when the earth became dry, and they adapted to living there, including human beings whom he said grew out of fish-like creatures. 2,600 years ago. A few years later, Leucippus and his brilliant student Democritus developed atomic theory. Physicist Carlo Rovelli says Democritus explained the entire universe is made up of boundless space in which innumerable atoms run. Atoms have no qualities at all apart from their shape. They have no weight, no color, no taste. In Democritus's own words, sweetness is opinion. Bitterness is opinion. Heat, cold, and color are opinion. In reality, only atoms and vacuum. Thales, Anaximander, Leucippus, Democritus, and other early Greek philosophers understood things about the nature of reality, gravity, evolution, quantum physics that weren't discovered again until the likes of Newton, Darwin, and Einstein came more than 25 centuries later. No wonder Aristotle called them physikoi, the physicist. Imagine where the world would be today had the ideas and discoveries of these brilliant thinkers not been shut down during the Dark Ages. We would have probably cured cancer and been living on Mars centuries ago. A point of which I am most serious. Look how far we've come in a so much shorter time since these discoveries were rediscovered. To summarize, the Renaissance is so named because of its renewal or renewed interest in the discovery of these early Greek philosophers. Right? That's what the Renaissance was about. Their way of seeing the world, including their necessarily positive view of human reason and human agency. Right? They had to believe in themselves. They had to believe in humanity, that we have it within us to figure things out. These ideas in turn flourished during the Enlightenment, which began in the 17th century, resulting in many social reforms, including democracy and the abolition of slavery, for example, in the 19th century. But more to my point here, the Enlightenment, dedicated to reason and science, having a positive view of human nature and human agency, that we can do it, and a commitment to human welfare and progress, resulted in a scientific and technological revolution that remains unparalleled in human history. As philosopher Heinrich Treitschke once said, everything new that the 19th century created is the work of liberalism, aka the Enlightenment project. Treitschke's words were cited in 1927 by my famous predecessor, Reverend John H. Dietrich, the father of religious humanism, who himself said, "It was this movement of liberalism which makes the 19th century as the most remarkable period of human history. In fact, the 19th century did more to add to the sum total of human life than all other centuries of the Christian era put together." Of course, 1927, when he gave that sermon, was 100 years ago. The computer, internet, and today artificial intelligence has since come along. Surely, these are more impressive than anything invented during the 19th century, the 1800s. Yet, as scientist Eklof Smil says in his 2020 book, Numbers Don't Lie, most recent advances have been variations of two older fundamental discoveries, microprocessors and exploiting radio waves, which occurred during the 1800s. In fact, Smil says, perhaps the most inventive time in human history was the 1880s. That's when electricity became a household commodity thanks to the invention of thermal and hydropower generation stations that still provide 80% of today's energy. It's also when the first electromagnetic waves were discovered, leading to the first wireless communication technology, the radio. Electric irons, multi-story skyscrapers, the steam turbine, coin-operated vending machines, the four-stroke combustion engine, elevators, revolving doors, electric streetcars, electric motors, cash registers, X-rays, ultraviolet light, infrared radiation, microwaves, chain-driven bicycles, and many, many other inventions that our lives and technology still depend on today were all discovered during the 19th century, immediately following the Enlightenment's age of reason. As political scientist Francis Fukuyama says, the same is true in general. Historically, liberal societies have been engines of economic growth, creators of new technologies, and producers of vibrant art and culture. This occurred precisely because they were liberal, he says. It is a product of liberalism. Liberalism, it should be obvious, is but another term, again, for Enlightenment values, those that I've outlined. And it only makes sense, right, that societies devoted to freedom, including the freedom for individuals to think for themselves, to think outside of the collective box, will foster innovations, including in the areas of science and technology. It doesn't happen when we get shut down, when we're told there's only one right way. All of this adequately makes the case that technological advancement is a direct consequence of the Enlightenment project. But how does it relate to the humanistic ethic, to the human dignity and well-being that is at the heart of the Enlightenment project? It is undeniable that technology has often had devastating impacts on the environment, polluting our air, fouling our water, killing our oceans, and contributing, of course, to global warming, one of the worst existential crises our world has ever faced. Yet I would argue that such damage, though caused directly by some industries, is more indirectly caused by the failure of our government to do its job through adequate, though not overbearing, regulations and laws, right? Not overbearing in the sense that we can't build the houses we need because we're afraid of the endangered crickets that someone who finds who doesn't want new apartments in their neighborhood. Scientists have known about the greenhouse gas effect since it was discovered, guess when? In the 1800s. But it wasn't until the 1960s that people became aware enough to be concerned about the impacts humans are having on the environment, thanks largely to the publication of Rachel Carson's historic book, Silent Spring, in 1962, about the potential dangers of pesticide and other environmental concerns. 7 years later, just 7 years later, the National Environmental Policy Act passed, requiring federal agencies to assess the environmental impacts of all of its major projects. A year later, April 22nd, 1970, does anybody know what that was the birthday of? That was the first Earth Day. Earth Day, but it occurred in the form of a protest involving more than 20 million Americans, still the largest protest in American history. That same year, during his inauguration speech, President Richard Nixon said, "Restoring nature to its natural state is a cause beyond party and beyond factions. It has become a common cause for all the people in this country. It is a cause of particular concern to young Americans because they, more than we, will reap the grim consequences of our failure to act on programs which are needed now if we are to prevent disaster later. Clean air, clean water, open spaces, these should once again be the birthright of every American. If we act now, they can be." As Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson explain in their recent book, Abundance, Nixon went on to sign the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and created the Environmental Protection Agency, making him arguably the most important environmentalist president of the 20th century. These are examples of federal laws and agencies that have worked to protect and repair the environment, including bringing species back from the brink of extinction. Another was the Montreal Protocol of substances that harm the ozone layer or deplete the ozone layer, an international treaty signed in 1987, including in the US and Canada, that reduced and eventually eliminated the chemicals that had put a hole in the Earth's protective ozone layer. That hole is now gone. Gone because our governments took action, took strategic action, with measurable steps along the way. The point is that when our government's main goal is human welfare and progress, guided by this humanistic ethic, we're able to collectively address our greatest challenges. But when they're focused on other priorities, like hoarding and maintaining power or pursuing the interest of only a few, then we can't adequately address our challenges. But this is a failure as much of our democracies, not of industry, big business, or capitalism, which most often get the blame. If those things go away, our problems are not going to go away. I often say corporations are not persons and they should not have the same rights as persons. But they are owned by persons. They employ persons. They serve persons. For me, as a humanist who believes in the fundamental goodness of humanity, I presume that most businesses and corporations are owned, operated, and employed by good people with good intentions. Having dipped my toe in the waters of Silicon Valley, the tech capital of the world, through my connection to Singularity University and the Abundance Digital community, I'm confident that this is so. During a 2019 conference, Will Weissman of Singularity University said, "I'm here because like so many of you," right? So many of you at this tech conference, "I'm here because like so many of you, I believe in my core that an abundant world is possible in a not too distant future, and I want to do everything that I can to help bring this to fruition." Then he explains what that world looks like. It's not a world with flying cars and robots that are serving our every need and those sort of things. Here's what that world looks like. To me, that world looks like a world where we feed everyone, where we educate everyone, where we shelter everyone, a world where people feel safe and they feel they have a fair shot at living a good life. As Singularity University's founder, Peter Diamandis, often says, rather than a future of dog-eat-dog, I see a world of increasing abundance, a world where we can actually imagine uplifting humanity and using technology to meet the needs of every man, woman, and child. That's the humanistic ethic talking. We often want to blame capitalism in general, and billionaires in particular, for our economic woes. But people are not poor because some people are wealthy, not any more than some people are dumb because some are smart, or some are mean because some are kind. That's not logical, that kind of arguing. Most billionaires today are billionaires because they've invented transformative technologies that have enriched our own lives and that are reasonably affordable for most people. Millions or even billions of consumers made them billionaires. Right? Millions and millions of consumers like us have made them billionaires. Through technology that has made us wealthier than anyone who's ever lived before this period. As Peter Diamandis often says, if you want to make $1 billion, help 1 billion people. The problem with wealth is when our governments fail to apply adequate but not overbearing tax structures, which again is a failure of government, not economics. When most people speak ill of capitalism, they're really referring to crony capitalism, a term coined by journalist George Tabor in 1980 to describe a system characterized by close, mutually advantageous relationships between business leaders and government officials. This kind of capitalism is, again, a failure of the government as much as anything else. And when someone like Donald Trump passes a law to try to tax a booming industry like the green energy industry, one of the fastest growing industries in America, out of business in favor of waning industries like coal, oil, and gas, that's not capitalism. We can't blame capitalism for that. That's not what capitalism is. That's the antithesis of a free market economy. That's the government interfering with the free market economy. But my point here is only to show that businesses are not innately unjust and greedy enterprises. Some of them are. Just like about 30% of us are, according to the research. You know, kind of destructive in nature. But most of us aren't. And this includes especially tech-driven businesses. They are human endeavors that allow humans to serve and benefit the whole of humanity through our systems of trade. The very term entrepreneur comes from the French word meaning adventurer. And that's what they are, people driven by an overwhelming goal that often compels them to risk everything that they have in the service of humanity. As the authors of the book Conscious Capitalism say, with few exceptions, entrepreneurs who start successful businesses don't do so to maximize profits. Of course, they want to make money, but that is not what drives them. They are inspired to do something that they believe needs doing. This book goes on to say, entrepreneurs are the true heroes in a free enterprise economy. Driving progress in business, society, and the world, they solve problems by creatively envisioning different ways the world could be and should be. With their imagination, creativity, passion, and energy, they are the greatest creators of widespread changes in the world. They are able to see new possibilities and enrich the lives of others by creating things that never existed before. So I think I've made my case well enough that even Oscar the Grouch would have to agree. The singularity is intricately entwined with the humanistic ethic and the Enlightenment project. But my real point, the only reason I'm addressing this topic at all, is to remind all of us that the purpose of technology lies in its service to human well-being, progress, individual growth, and development. Technologies that do not serve this purpose are not worth pursuing, and if they already exist, should be abandoned and eliminated, like nuclear weapons. Technologies that are aligned with human values and needs, yet have some negative consequences, particularly impacts on the environment or human health, ought to be replaced and improved with newer versions as soon as possible. And most importantly, technologies for which there is unquestionably positive consequences that will be obviously transformative, yet may have unforeseen negative consequences like artificial intelligence, which may give us godlike powers within just the next few years, must remain coupled and aligned with this humanistic ethic, so that they exist for no other purpose than human welfare and advancement, which again always includes the welfare of our planet and our fellow creatures. We can't be healthy or whole without that. Fortunately, this is the mandate that's being heavily discussed in Silicon Valley these days, where it especially needs to be happening. My hope is to remind my fellow Singularitarians that the values they're talking about have already been well outlined in the humanistic ethic, and that their efforts are but the continuation of human endeavors that began centuries ago, known today as the Enlightenment project. The technological singularity is rooted in the past, perhaps as far as back as whatever singularity erupted to create our universe to begin with, if that's what happened. James Webb is confusing us about what the origins of our existence. But we know at least as far back as these early Greek philosophers whose forgotten ideas were rediscovered a few centuries ago and have since led to the cultural, societal, scientific, and technological advances that we now enjoy, and to the technological miracles that are right around the corner. No matter where we end up from here, may their creativity, their curiosity, their courage, and above all, their humanity long remain part of who we are and part of who we are to become. Thank you. Thank you.